When I was a young boy, my father took me into the city to see a marching band. That's a lie. Never seen a marching band. Never even been to the city. Aww. Welcome back to another video. If you're new here, I'm Trevor and I am eternally uncool. I make videos about music, music culture, and anything that interests me. But mostly music right now. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, hit the subscribe button. I'd like to give a quick shout out to the band Grandeur. They're a really cool local band. They sent me a really nice, really cool, really positive DM. And, you know, it just really made my day. So I thought I'd give them a little shout out. They have a new EP, it's on Spotify, and you should go listen to it. But after you watch this video, remember, you're here to watch me. Who comes to mind when I say the phrase, the most important band of all time? The Beatles? Nirvana? Radiohead? Maybe it's your own personal favorite band, and that's fair, but what if I told you you're wrong?
How dare you?
What if I told you the most important band of all time formed within the last 20 years? Would you believe me?
No!
What if I told you the most important band of all time is My Chemical Romance? My Chemical Romance is one of the few bands from the 2000s emo boom that escaped unscathed. They managed to enter the 2010s with their artistic integrity and their fan base firmly intact. And their fan base, the MC Army, is one of the most loyal and protective fan bases of all time. They're a band that has influenced a whole new generation of artists, from radio rock to metalcore. What I wanted to do with this video was explore the history of My Chemical Romance. Their formation, their career, their albums, their lore.
What the lore? The lore, guys, the lore!
All in an effort to see if MCR can really be called the greatest band of all time. So grab a drink and a snack, get comfortable. This is gonna be a doozy. Let's get into it. My Chemical Romance was formed in 2001 after Gerard Way witnessed the events of September 11th. He was working at Cartoon Network at the time, trying to pitch a show.
Did I hear breakfast? Oh, it's you, Lucha Lache, world famous Spanish wrestling man.
Sí, ¿cómo está usted?
Oh, silly man. Your language makes no sense to me.
And while on the ferry that took him from his home in New Jersey to the CN offices in New York, him and his fellow passengers witnessed the attack on the World Trade Center. He decided that after witnessing such a traumatic event that he wanted to do something more meaningful with his life instead of making cartoons and toys for a corporation. And that something meaningful would be music. They got their name from a book by Scottish author Irvine Welsh, known for novels like Trainspotting. Gerard's brother Mikey was working at a Barnes & Noble at the time, and he says the title really struck him.
He was like, wouldn't it be kind of cool if you put a "my" in front of that? Made it My Chemical Romance.
As far as I know, they didn't really go under any other names, which is unusual for bands. Usually bands go through several name changes before they finally find one that sticks. But My Chemical Romance had the perfect name from the start, especially when you consider that Gerard Way was on antidepressants and would move on to other chemical romances as the band moved on. It was a great name is what I'm getting at. Gerard would recruit his friend Matt Otter Pelessier to play drums and Raymond Toro to play guitar. Matt and Ray had previously been in a band together called the Rodneys, and Gerard was a big fan of Ray's playing. And Mikey Way really wanted to be a part of what his brother was doing, so he taught himself to play bass. And while in the studio, Ray Toro was laying down so many different guitar parts that it would have been impossible for him to play them live if they didn't have another guitar player. And they knew the only qualified candidate was Frank Iero, who had just gotten off of a stint with Pencey Prep. Pencey Prep released an album, it didn't really do well. they toured with My Chemical Romance, taking them out and just, giving them their sea legs. And Frank was a huge fan of My Chemical Romance, and so he jumped at this opportunity to be their guitar player. With their lineup in place, My Chemical Romance was born. They would tour relentlessly in a shitty van that would break down constantly, but they would gain momentum with each and every show. Even early on, their shows were energetic and visceral. They treated each show as less of a performance and more of a battle. Them against the audience. And they won every night with how intense their shows were. The power of Gerard's vocals, the technical god that is Ray Toro. The audiences were growing and growing, and eventually My Chemical Romance would move from their indie label Eyeball to the major label Reprise. And that's where things really start to take off. My Chemical Romance's second album, Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge, really catapulted them into the mainstream radar. The album took everything they were already good at as a band. Catchy hooks, vivid storytelling, technical skill, and cranked it up to 11.
11.
A major label has the money to get the best engineers, the best producers, the best techs. And My Chemical Romance took this opportunity to work with the best producer in Howard Benson. I think originally they wanted Butch Vig because of his work with Nirvana on Nevermind, but for whatever reason Butch Vig couldn't make it. But Howard Benson brought out the best in the band, focusing on Gerard's undeniable star power. The band really became more of a unit during this time. They decided that they needed to look like a gang, so they started wearing the black shirts, the red ties, or vice versa. I always like this about the band. I love when bands dress up and don't just look like guys who are just playing in a band. I like when bands look like a band. Their theatricality is one of the things that draws people into them. It reminds them of the golden age of bands like Queen and Iron Maiden. With the release of songs like I'm Not Okay, The Ghost of You, and Helena, My Chem was quickly establishing themselves as a band to look out for. Who were these guys from New Jersey? And one from Chicago. And one from Chicago, making these bombastic anthems and wearing eyeliner and looking dead. They would tour with bands who were huge at the time, like The Used, but would eventually eclipse them while on tour with The Used, which is insane to eclipse the band that you're opening for. Come on. They would co-headline the legendary 2005 Vans Warped Tour with Fall Out Boy, who was also getting absolutely gigantic at the time. They were having videos played on MTV, they were appearing on TRL, they were in teeny bopper magazines. Gerard Way was being pictured in these magazines next to like Zac Efron and the Sprouse Twins. My Chemical Romance wasn't just breaking into the mainstream, they were making an entrance. With the release of their third album, Welcome to the Black Parade, My Chemical Romance established themselves as a force in modern rock music. This was the album that blew everyone away. Here was this band that not too long ago was singing about how they're not okay, and now they're the saviors of the broken, the beaten, and the damned. They crafted this incredible story, themes of loss and hopelessness and mortality. The Black Parade mixed classic arena rock with an emo twist. There were whiffs of Queen and David Bowie, but also the Misfits thrown in there. It was bombastic, it was huge. It's an album with no skips. It's perfect. Even Anthony Fantano considers it a classic, and he's not very kind to emo and pop punk.
I'm gonna pretend you didn't say that.
It became the band's defining album, with its dark imagery and marching band uniforms and Gerard's platinum hair. For the longest time, as a teenager, I wanted to dye my hair completely white. Should I do it? If this video gets 1,000 views, I would dye my hair white. They'd ride this momentum by touring with huge bands like Linkin Park and Taking Back Sunday and him and Rise Against. They even managed to kill off their Black Parade persona so they can start working on their next album. Originally, they were going to do something more in the vein of Iggy and the Stooges, kind of like a proto-punk revival. They had just done a more punkish cover of Bob Dylan's Desolation Row for the Watchmen soundtrack, and everyone, including the band, thought that that was the direction they were going to go in. But what they did was something no one was expecting from this band. Danger Days took the band's comic book influences and brought them to life. They went from being the Black Parade to the Killjoys, a band of outlaws in the far-off year of 2019. The songs were made to sound like what My Chemical Romance thought rock music would sound like in the year 2019, and they weren't far off. Then they announced their breakup, and their fan base collectively mourned, including me. I can remember what I was doing when I read the news that My Chemical Romance was over. I think I was in high school and everyone was getting ready for prom. Not me though, I didn't go to prom. They were so beloved that even while broken up, they still gained new and younger fans. And when they returned, it was just gigantic. It was insane. I wanted to get tickets at the time, but they went like that. They dropped Foundations of Decay like 2 years after coming back. It was like they never left. MCR is a band that could go away for almost 10 years and still gain new fans. Announce a comeback during a shutdown, still do that tour, release a comeback single, play at what was essentially the grown-up Warped Tour with When We Were Young Fest, and have it be like they never left at all.
We've always been pretty adamant or vocal about our message.
My Chemical Romance is a band with a purpose. They're a band who wants to save your life.
MCR saved my life. That's the fucking real point of all this.
A lot of bands form because they want to bring some kind of message to the masses, whether it be a political statement like Rage Against the Machine, or just having a good time and being goofy with your bros like Blink-182. I'm sure there were and are a lot of bands who are against self-harm and self-unaliving, but how many of them were at the level of My Chemical Romance? Their whole mission was to make their fans feel less alone. And it came from a group of musicians who had those same feelings of isolation and insecurity and problems.
It's okay to be messed up because there's 5 dudes that are just as messed up as you, and we've overcome that in order to do what we do.
Gerard Way has been open about their struggles with alcoholism and substance abuse, as well as depression. There was also a time during the band's peak where he almost decided to cut it short, for lack of a better word. But the band and the fans and the music saved his life.
The time it saved my life was when I was super depressed and on a lot of antidepressants, and I wasn't going to do anything with my life. The second time it saved my life was when I was an alcoholic and depressed and suicidal.
In a time when the media viewed emo as people whining about their problems, about girlfriends, they viewed it as something satanic and evil, as some sort of like death cult. MCR flipped the narrative into something positive. They wanted you to not be afraid to keep on living.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I am not afraid to keep on living. I am not afraid to melt inside my room. My Chemical Romance was one of the most popular rock bands of the 2000s. That means they had a lot of bands trying to replicate what they were doing, and others who just straight up jacked their style. That's a bit of an exaggeration if I'm being honest. But there were a lot of bands who saw what My Chemical Romance was doing and tried to do their own version of that. In the early to mid 2000s, emo was huge. It was like what grunge was in the 90s. It was a movement. And just like grunge, labels and corporations tried to commodify it. Labels signed any band that was from Seattle or wore flannel or were a little bit punk. They were trying to get the next Nirvana. And emo was no different. When bands like My Chemical Romance and Fall Out Boy started getting huge, labels were chomping at the bit to sign anyone who made anything even slightly similar. You had bands like Aiden that clearly took a lot of influence from My Chemical Romance, as well as bands like Misfits. And don't get me wrong, I love Aiden, but you can't deny the similarities. And of course, early Panic took cues from My Chemical Romance with the makeup and theatricality and whatnot. And just like Nirvana in the 90s influenced countless rock bands and artists, My Chemical Romance did the same in the 2000s. Artists like Lil Peep and Post Malone and Halsey cite My Chemical Romance as an influence. They've influenced everyone from Black Veil Brides to Sleeping with Sirens to Save Face, and they still continue to influence new bands and artists today. I often see My Chemical Romance compared to Nirvana in terms of their impact and influence. Now, before you bring out your pitchforks and torches, allow me to explain. Nirvana in the 90s was the face of the grunge movement. My Chemical Romance is the same, but for emo. Every other band after them tried to replicate what they were doing, whether it be with their sound or with their look. Nirvana is a band that everyone loves, whether you love rock, punk, pop, hip-hop. You acknowledge that Nirvana is one of the GOATs. It's the same with MCR. I've never met someone who doesn't like at least one My Chemical Romance song, or who doesn't think that they're a big deal in the pop punk and emo and scene world. I can see how My Chemical Romance is kind of like an emo 2000s version of Nirvana. My Chemical Romance is one of the few bands from the 2000s who are still a big deal today, and not just in terms of pop punk and emo. They're up there with bands like Arctic Monkeys and Paramore and Hailstorm, and of course, Fall Out Boy. They're still gaining younger fans, which isn't something you could say for a lot of 2000 scene bands. My Chem is multi-generational. That is a feat that only a band with as much charisma and as much artistic integrity like My Chemical Romance can achieve. Why did I make this video? Why do I make any video? The honest reason is because I crave attention and the validation of strangers. I made this particular video because My Chemical Romance is my favorite band of all time. I've been a fan since I was 14 years old. I can remember being in 8th grade and a girl who was in my math class, I had a crush on her, and she was wearing a My Chemical Romance shirt one day, and I didn't know who they were at the time. I think I'd maybe heard like the Black Parade on the radio a few times, and I think I maybe saw the Helena, not the Helena video, I think I maybe saw the Ghost of You video, and it really freaked me out as a kid. I thought it was really depressing, it really upset me. But I liked this girl, and I wanted her to think I was cool, so I went out to Hot Topic, I had $20 somehow, and I bought a My Chemical Romance shirt. Now, nothing ever happened with this girl, but I did wind up finding something more important, which was the band that would change my life. And I wore this shirt for like years to come, probably like 10 years, to the point that it got all stretched out, it got holes everywhere in the neck, down the back. The design faded to the point that you couldn't even tell that it was a My Chemical Romance shirt at all. It just looked like a normal black crew neck. And I was really bummed when I had to throw it away because it was like throwing away an old friend. But that's okay, because I have a whole merch table's worth of My Chemical Romance t-shirts. I have all their albums on vinyl and CD. I have books about them. I spent countless hours watching interviews and music videos and compilations. This was the first band that I ever connected to on a personal level. I was always an outsider. I was an artsy kid who liked movies and books and the kind of music that no one else in my class was really listening to. When I discovered MCR, I found a group of guys who were like me. They were outsiders who made something special. And I connected most with Gerard Way, not just because he was the front man, but because he was a person who had ambitions that were too big for the state of New Jersey, in the same way that I feel like my ambitions are kind of too big for the state of Delaware. And seeing him struggle and overcome his alcoholism really helped me when I was also struggling and trying to overcome alcoholism. He's made a name for himself not only with his band, but with other things that he was passionate about, like comic books. That's something I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to not be pigeonholed to one thing. I want to make videos, I want to make movies, I want to write books, I want to make music if given the opportunity. I want to do everything. And Gerard Way and the rest of My Chemical Romance proved that's possible for someone like me.
Today, Junior?
Is My Chemical Romance the most important band of all time? Have they earned that title? My Chemical Romance is definitely a band that stands the test of time. They've managed to eclipse a lot of their peers in terms of success and influence. They're definitely not fading from the public consciousness anytime soon. They're in a league with all these classic rock bands like Nirvana, Queen, all of them. They opened the doors for a lot of things that are staples in rock music today. Theatricality, vulnerability, storytelling, stage presence, makeup. I don't think we'd have bands like 21 Pilots or Water Parks without My Chemical Romance. But the question still stands. Is My Chemical Romance the most important band of all time? And I think the answer is yes. My Chemical Romance is the most important band of all time. And it's not just because they're my favorite band. Their influence on modern rock music is undeniable. They were the leading figures in a cultural movement. And even after that phenomenon had run its course and faded from public memory, My Chemical Romance was still an important band. My Chemical Romance is probably the most important band of the last 20 years. What do you think? Do you think that MCR is the most important band of all time? Or do you think that title goes to someone else? Let me know in the comments. That's gonna do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did enjoy it, I highly recommend playing a game of Slapbox with the like button. And I'm sure if you enjoyed it, there's someone in your life who would probably enjoy it too. So you should share this video with everyone you know. Everyone. I'm an independent creator who does almost everything on his own, and every like, every comment, any interaction with this video at all really helps me out. I would like to thank you all for watching. As always, I'm Trevor. Stay uncool. And that's the end of the video. Goodbye.